Before I get into today's episode, I wanted to give a huge thank you to my listeners. This podcast is being regularly listened to in 9 different countries, which means that the message is getting out around the world. Thank you also to those of you who have come to me with great questions, and some that have shared their own stories and even given me topic suggestions. Please keep all of this coming. I will never share another person's private story, and I will always keep the details of who has asked me the questions anonymous. I have also had some great general practical questions asked to me several times by different people and through different communication channels. When I hear a question several times, it makes me think that there may be more of you that would like to know the answers. So, one question that I received almost daily is, how am I recording this podcast? As you get to know me better through this podcast, you may have started to realize I love research and facts and to break them down into simple, easy to follow steps. So, before I got started on this journey, you can guess what I did. Research. I discovered podcasts about a year ago. I would definitely say I was much later to the podcast game than most. And at that particular time in my life, I was having a hard time absorbing information through reading because I had a lot of what I would call thought noise or mental noise going on in my brain. My brain was definitely a very busy place. In spite of that, as always, I was still craving learning, so I decided to try listening to a podcast. I was also having trouble sitting still. So what worked best for me was listening while doing chores, running, walking, or driving. I really enjoyed the variety of content and that I could easily absorb information in the format that it was being given in. I also had a bigger and bigger growing personal need to start telling my story in a way that would help others. I knew that it would both be healing and also rewarding in this way. So I started to make a note of podcast formats that I liked, including sound quality, music, and so on. I started to look into how to make one myself. After coming up with the name and creating the branding, I created my own format and my content. I tested out many microphones and recording softwares until I found ones that I liked, and, most importantly, that sounded like me when I played them back. This took some trial and error. I had a really hard time with the listening as recording aspect of podcasting because, as some of you may not know, I wear hearing aids. Noise canceling headphones don't work for me because they make my hearing aids whistle really loudly. In-the-ear headphones require me to take out my hearing aids, which means I'm hearing in a way that's not reflective of how most of the population hears. I even tried headphones that transmit sound through bones, and for me, it made me nauseous. I finally settled on a pair of open-fit headphones. They're honestly life-changing because I can hear what is going on around me and how I sound in the recording. I have someone help me with the editing of the podcast to remove background noise and add in music. And I chose to do this because it would be a very long learning curve for me to do so. I'm very familiar with what I am good at and what I am not. If you have any questions you would like to ask, please feel free to send them along. I love hearing from you. Today's episode will focus on an introduction to letting people go. This could be a friend, a colleague, a relative, or anyone in your life that is not serving you well. So, what exactly does letting go of someone mean? I will be discussing letting go of a relationship in the following framework. You have already accepted how a relationship has developed and have come to realize it is not one you can continue, and you need to move on from it in order to move forwards in your own life. It is important to know that letting go of someone can be a very difficult thing to do. It can appear that some people do this easily and with no remorse. However, for most of us who experience meaningful connections, it is a very hard process and requires the 7 stages of grief in order to move on from it. So, how does keeping someone in your life who is not serving you well contribute to a negative cycle? When you stay in a relationship that is not healthy for you, out of your sense of obligation or your sense of fear, it limits your ability to navigate your own life and can prevent you from finding happiness, or contribute to you becoming very unhappy yourself. When you are tethered or attached to someone unhealthy or unhelpful, you can't possibly be free. They are always on the back of your mind, as it is impossible for them not to be. It is a huge weight that you carry, day in and day out. Additionally, maintaining these relationships reinforces the behavior that is perhaps toxic, negative, or abusive. By staying, You are allowing yourself and the other person involved to believe that it is okay to continue existing in this way. Here's my story. I grew up thinking and believing that cultural and societal norms and expectations were the only way to exist. I was applauded for being such a good person, a tolerant person, a patient person, and so on. I held myself to a standard of excellence that ended up being to my detriment. This included maintaining many relationships that were not safe or good for me, because based on how I understood the world, it was my obligation to do so. Praise only reinforced my behavior. While internally I was so unhappy, empty, and unfulfilled, I was receiving praise, so I took that to mean I was doing something positive. The problem with praise is when people give it, they often do not look at the whole story, and it can reinforce bad behaviors. It was not until I was told over and over again by other survivors that you do not need to stay in a bad relationship just because society says you should. That's when I realized I was the exception in the group, staying in the relationship for so long, and I knew at that point I needed to start to take steps to correct this. So, how did staying in a negative relationship impact me as an adult? Staying in negative relationships for me became like wearing cement with terrifying objects in it. I began to feel weighed down because I was emotionally exhausted from dealing with unhealthy relationships and from putting others' needs before my own. I would do everything I could to placate other people so that they would not become upset with me in order to protect myself and prevent feelings of fear and anxiety. Those feelings of fear and anxiety are what was represented when I mentioned the cement that I felt like I was wearing with scary objects in it. This is an impossible feat. You could not control other people's thoughts. When you are dealing with individuals with untreated mental health disorders, as I was, it becomes a very unhealthy cycle to think that you can. So, what have I done to correct this? Step 1. When you get to the point of realizing you do not want to maintain a relationship, start to write down what is not serving you well. For example, is the other person selfish, hurtful, unpredictable, turbulent? You need to see this list laid out in order to reinforce your thoughts about this person and to make them tangible. Additionally, if the relationship improves for a while, which it might, once these behaviors present themselves again, this list can serve as a reminder for why you do not want to continue. Step 2. Start to implement boundaries and distance. This can be very hard to do, especially if you are in a situation where the relationship is particularly deep-rooted, has lasted a long time, and could have reached a level of unhealthy dependence. The boundaries and distance will allow you to see if you start to feel some relief. If you do, this is a very good sign that you are moving in the right direction. If the person cannot respect your boundaries, this is also a sign that you are moving in the right direction. It is normal for other people to be upset with, surprised by, and uncomfortable with boundaries. However, in a healthy relationship, they will respect them. Speaking from personal experience, it is very important to be explicitly clear about your boundaries. An individual who does not want these boundaries up will take every indication that they can to continue contact with you and revert to old relationship patterns. If you think you are being too clear or too harsh, you are likely not. You are just used to putting the other person before you. Step 3. Ending the relationship. When you have come to a point where you have made a concrete decision to end the relationship, you need to let the other person know that they are not allowed to contact you any longer. You do not have to explain the why. You can if you want to. However, it is not owed to the other person, and they likely won't even understand or accept your reasoning. This can be a very hard part. This is when you may need to allow yourself to go through the movements of the 7 stages of grief. You may need your friends, peers, support systems, therapists during this time. While the act of ending a relationship can be scary, overwhelming, and adrenaline-filled, once it is done, it can be followed by immense grief. It is important that you pick people who will be supportive of your decision and not make you feel badly for making it. Here is my experience and how I implemented the steps I mentioned before in order to lead to a positive outcome. The first time I had to end an unhealthy relationship, it was gut wrenching, heartbreaking, and took me months and months to accomplish. I felt like a horrible person, even though people around me were puzzled by why I was staying in the relationship. I went back and forth on my choice. I knew I could not maintain the existence of what was going on, but I also could not imagine life without it. I was holding myself up to unhealthy and unrealistic expectations. When I finally ended the relationship, I felt relief. I still felt sadness and missed the other person, but the overarching feeling was a very profound sense of relief. Over time, that relief became stronger while the other feelings faded. This set me up for the hardest relationship of my life to walk away from. This was a relationship that had become so negative, I was afraid for my life every day. When this type of fear occurs over years and years, what can happen is the victim can feel a need to keep the other person in their life so that they know where they are in order to feel safe. This is a complicated concept, so I am going to repeat it because I know there are others out there that really need to hear this. When you are in a relationship where you fear for your life, you can become so entrenched in awareness of your abuser that you keep them in your life in order not to be afraid of them. With the help of my previous experience, I knew I could move away from this, and I did. I used the steps I shared with you to break free, and I cannot tell you what a difference it has made in my life. I feel calmness, solace, a sense of comfort and ease, and that is a feeling we all deserve to experience. Believe me, if I was able to break free, you can too.